Hey, welcome to the Breakaway Podcast. We hope you enjoy the talks and stick around for more at the end.
Well, there are few things in life that are worse than the 400-yard dash. I don't even know why they call it a dash. You know, honestly, 400 yards at a brisk clip feels like an eternity. Am I right? It's awful. And I remember in high school when we had to train for football, they would have running days where they would just take us out and over again we would run the 400-yard dash. And going that far at a full clip was miserable. I remember running it, and literally at the last 100 yards, it felt like parts of my body were shutting down. Like my nose would go numb, and then my ears, like weird stuff. And I'm running like, why is this happening? And I was like, it feels like my body inside is just like having to divert all energy to the legs. Like, get energy from the nose, do something, all right? Just trying to let me survive running days in high school, which were some of the worst days of my life. But I remember clearly there was always a moment when our football coach would have us out there running the 400-yard dash over and over again. We would hit a moment where it was not just our physical breaking point, it was also like our mental breaking point. You know what I mean? Like we were about to collapse and become emotional cripples. We were all just hunched over, doing that kind of spit, I'm trying not to throw up thing. We were like, okay. And I remember we were just hated life. And he would wait till that moment, and then I'll never forget, he would always step forward, Coach Davis, and he would go, men. And then he would start into what we called his fourth quarter speech. And he would start talking to us about how tired, I know you're tired, and start talking about how miserable it is now. But then he said, but let me tell you something. And then he would start talking about the fourth quarter of the next football game. And he started talking about that moment when the other team's exhausted and you're not. You've got this whole other gear. And then he talked about how we were going to band together as a team and drive forward towards a goal in that moment. And then he talked about the glory of that moment, of crossing the finish line, of crossing the goal line, scoring the winning goal, having the crowd celebrate us, celebrating as friends' victory. And he would paint the picture. And, all coaches are supposed to talk like that. And so sometimes it felt a little forced, but not with Coach Davis. You believed it. You could smell it. You could taste it. And I remember as he talked about the fourth quarter and what it would be like to celebrate that glorious moment of victory together, something would happen in us. That this horrible moment, we would start to go, yeah, I want that. And as we pictured that moment, it was so inspiring to us, and it suddenly made this moment not vain. We realized this moment was preparation for that. This moment would lead to that. And the more we thought about that moment and the glory of it, it would begin to stir us up, and the weirdest thing would happen. Even though seconds before we were about to break, the next time he said, line it up, we would get on the line and there was like a fire in us. And typically dudes would scream when he would tell us to go. He'd be like, go, we're like, ah! All right, and just run. And we would always get like our fastest times. And something crazy would happen and we would always marvel at it at the end. Something would occur to us. A contemplation of the end totally transformed how we ran in that moment. Now I mention that because tonight, where we are in the book of 1 Thessalonians as we journey through it, is we're in a contemplation of the end. And the end, like big capital E end, like end of the world. That's the section we're in. Although we're going to talk about aspects of it that you may not expect. There's no dragons in this text, no fire or beasts or Uzis or anything like that. The Antichrist is going to be in 2 weeks, so stay tuned. But we're going to cover a part that was a lot bigger deal, I think, in past centuries than it is to us, and we're going to try to correct that tonight. But not just the end. We're going to talk about the end of all things, but we're also going to talk about your end, the end of you, that we're all going to die. And I remember in college, I took fencing one semester, which was a blast. Loved it. And I remember in that class, there were a lot of dudes who took fencing way too seriously, all right? But there was one dude I remember sitting by, and we became friends in class, which was unique for me because I was a pretty shy guy by nature. I didn't make a lot of friends sitting in class. And this guy and I became friends, and I would look forward to seeing him in that class because we were kind of buddies in this class. And so I remember the day I got into class, and I looked around, he wasn't there, and they started calling his name in the roll, and the coach just called his name 3, 4, 5 times. No answer. And then one girl finally just raised her hand kind of slowly, and she said, Coach, he died. was in the paper this weekend. Fell out of the back of a truck. And I remember the room just got silent because he had been calling his name over and over again, and there was no answer. And, it's always like that. Probably all of us in here have been to funerals at some time, but when it's someone your own age or close to your age, it lands on you that I'm going to end too. And what am I supposed to think about when I contemplate that day? What am I supposed to grip onto? What perspective am I supposed to have? And we're going to talk about that. And the interesting thing about this text is Paul is going to take the end, capital E, and your end, and he's going to stick them very close together. That they should be thought of together. And we're going to figure out why here in a minute. But as we move to the text, I don't want to give that away too early. I want you to notice, I'm going to walk you through it together, and we'll see what the Thessalonians were concerned with. But he starts in verse 13, and Paul says to them, we don't want you to be uninformed, brothers. He says to them, I don't want you to be ignorant. There's something I want you to know. And then he tells you a reason, that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. And that indicates result. He says, I want you to know something with the result that you'll be different. The NIV really messes this up. They take the that out and put an or in. I don't want you to be ignorant or uninformed. No, it's a that, so that it indicates result. What he's saying is, I want you to know something. And when you know this, it will make you different from everybody else. He says, when you understand the knowledge I'm about to give you, when you really grab this and absorb it, you will no longer grieve like everyone else in the world. What I'm about to tell you will change the way you look at death. And we know it did, because the thing that the early centuries, 1st, 2nd, 3rd century, the Roman culture marveled at was the Christian perspective of death was so radically different and hope-filled. And he says, when you get this, you'll never grieve like the rest of them. And so you go, what's he going to tell him? Some people think it centers around that word sleep. He says, I want to teach you something about those who sleep. And I've heard people really grab that and go, see, Christians don't call it death. They just call it sleep. But that doesn't really work, because not just Christians called it sleep. Back then, everyone called it sleep. Homer in the Iliad talked about a soldier who died. And he says he slept the sleep of bronze. All right. Calling death sleep was very common in that day. For the Christian to call death sleep was not uniquely Christian. What's uniquely Christian in this passage is not calling death sleep. What's uniquely Christian is we think it's a sleep that we'll get up from. That's what's different. He says we grieve, but not as those who don't have hope. If you don't know what hope is biblically, hope is confident expectation. That I have confidence in something I'm expecting. And what's so different about the way we approach death than the rest of the world is this, that we approach it with a confidence and expectancy. How? Why? What's going on? But you see, back then, the rest of the world didn't have that. Theocritus said this, hopes are for the living, the dead are without hope. Catullus said this, the sun can rise and set again, but once our brief light sets, there is one unending night to be slept through. Their culture in that day had no hope in the face of death. They said, when you die, it's over. It's the setting of the sun and it will never rise again. And the Christian says, not for us. Not for us. So we grieve, and it's right to grieve. It's okay to cry at funerals. All through the Bible, read Acts 8 and 9. You see believers mourn and lament over the loss of another believer. It's not okay. It's okay to grieve. I remember going to a funeral of a student a couple of years ago and hearing a well-meaning student telling all his Christian buddies, don't cry, we're not supposed to grieve. And I'm like, actually, no, you are. It shouldn't be like this. It's okay to cry at a funeral. But what's different for us is our grief is shot through with hope. Now, why are we hopeful? What do we have hope in? What's going on with us? Why can we be this way? It's interesting. John Wesley, when he was coming to America in the 1700s, was coming as a minister. He was coming on a ship that was about to shipwreck, very dangerous, thought he was going to die. And he was coming as a Christian minister, although he wasn't a Christian. Very awkward deal. His ministry did not go well. But as he came over, one of the things that confronted him was when this ship went down, he was supposed to be the chaplain on the ship. But as it's going down, looks like it's going to go down. He's just like, oh God, he's totally freaking out. And then he saw a group of Moravians, and they were singing, worshiping in the face of death. And he said, I don't get y'all. Y'all look crazy, but it's an attractive crazy. And so he wanted to know more about it, and we want to too. How can we have that hope? Why do we not fear death? Well, he gives you the reason in verse 14. He says, for since, or better, if we believe that Jesus died and rose, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. Why do we have hope in the face of death? Here's why. Because our guy beat death. That's why. We have hope in the face of death because the guy we've hitched ourselves to beat it. That's the if in the sentence. Do you see it? He says, if we believe Jesus died and rose, and we do, then we believe we'll die and rise. Death's not the end for us either. If he beat it, we beat it. If he rose, so will we. That's the connection. And so our confidence, the basis of it, and this is important, the grounds and basis of Christian hope in the face of death is this, the resurrection of Christ. I believe this. I have confidence in this because it's happened already. I saw it. He died and didn't stay dead, and neither will we. Now, it's important to understand that's the basis for this reason. Oftentimes, you'll hear people who mock Christianity, who come from maybe a more atheistic perspective, is this. They'll say, the way you came up with an afterlife is it sprung forth from the basis of your wishful thinking. You were scared of death, and so you conjured up an idea to comfort you in the face of it. And so that's your basis, is wishful thinking. There was a movie that came out a couple years ago by Ricky Gervais. Remember him? I think Ricky Gervais is a very funny guy. Came up with The Office, that TV show. Very funny guy. I like him. But he came up with a movie called The Invention of Lying. And the movie posits a world where no one can lie, but then suddenly the main character, who's played by Ricky Gervais, suddenly has the ability to lie. And so in the movie, as you move through it, the big lie of the movie, the huge lie he perpetuates is this, that there's an afterlife. And the way he gets there is not mean, not cruel. He's sitting at his mother's deathbed, and she's scared as she faces death. And she says, tell me something. And so in an attempt to comfort her, he lies. And he makes up life after death. And so as the movie goes on, Ricky Gervais, who's an avowed atheist, says this, the big lie is that there's something after the grave. And you people who talk like that, you came up with it out of a sincere motive, wishful thinking, hoping there's something else. But that's your basis. And really what you've come up with is a big lie, and we need to get rid of it. And the rest of the movie kind of makes fun of Christians and their simplicity. But here's the deal. If Ricky was right about the basis, then he would be right about that conclusion. If our only reason for believing that there's something after death is because we wish there is or hope there is, even if it's a collective wishing, if we collectively said we just really don't want death to be the end, let's posit a future where there isn't one. Even if that was it, that would still be shameful and weird. But that's not our basis. Our basis is not wishful thinking. Our basis is historical precedent. The Christian doesn't go, I just really hope that's true. The Christian goes, hey, our guy did die, and then he didn't stay dead. And what's interesting is, and we're not going to go, we could spend the rest of our time talking about the resurrection. We've done talks about that before. That's how we launched our series on James last fall. But the reality is all of Christianity builds off this basis, the resurrection. If Jesus really died and rose, that means everything, and we should believe what he says. If he didn't, then who cares what he says? But it is all based on that. The reason we think death won't be the end for us is because it wasn't the end for him. And I don't want to give all arguments for the basis of why we can believe that historically happened. There's great bases for this. N.T. Wright wrote a great book on it. We did talks on it last fall. You can go to those. We'll talk about them later. But the reality is, we can trust this, and I'll just give you one reason why. There's no other way to explain us. And the people who assail Christianity from an atheistic perspective, they can't historically explain us. Because as you read through the Gospels, the way they'll say it in the Gospels is they'll say, well, what happened was Jesus died and everyone wished he didn't because they had really put a lot into him. And so the Gospels were written later. And in the Gospel, they said, he lives on in our hearts. And then it kind of became later through history. Maybe he really did rise from the grave, everybody. And so they were written much later, and they were kind of made up stories to make you feel good. That's sort of a way to explain the Gospels. The problem with that is the text we just read about Jesus dying and rising wasn't written late. It was written within a couple years of Jesus' death and resurrection. It's written right here next to it. It wasn't a story that was developed later. It came right out of there. And how do you explain a group of Jewish people who refused to worship any human being? They were willing to die when Caesar wanted to put his emblem in front of the temple. They said, oh, no, you won't. And they willfully died because they refused to worship Caesar. And yet suddenly, within a very short period of time, thousands of them are worshiping a man as God. How did that happen? How do you explain us without a resurrection? They can't. You can't. This little community wasn't looking for their Savior to be resurrected from the dead. You see it in the Gospels. The women came, Jesus rose. And the guys were like, no, they didn't. You're talking crazy. All right. And then suddenly they saw him. They're like, oh my gosh, they're totally serious right now. And you see, they weren't looking for that, expecting it. They were confused by it. They had to be convinced of it. But then when they believed it, when they realized, no, in history, that physical guy died, rose, ate fish, talked to me, he really beat death. When they got that, let me tell you something. It's on the basis of that historical event that we have confidence it's not the end for us either. So our confidence isn't rooted in wishful thinking. It's rooted in history. And I would invite you, if you're struggling with that, go on a journey to discover the historicity of the resurrection of Christ. Because if it really happened, it changes everything. And you sing in the face of death. And so they say, our guy beat death. And you go, so how does that mean I'll beat death? I mean, sure, he beat it, but why is that making it certain that I will? Well, you see in verse 15, he says, for this we declare to you by a word from the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will not precede those who have fallen asleep. You say, well, he died and rose. How am I sure I will? He says, for this we declare by a word from the Lord. He says, the reason we know we're coming to is because the Lord told us, and we trust him because he beat death. I mentioned that earlier. Like, we trust him. He died and rose, and he told us, hey, there's a day I'm going to come get you. And we believe him. And you can read it in Matthew 24, and Jesus is actually just kind of quoting and expanding on Daniel 12, this reality of a day when there will be a resurrection of the just, and Christ will come and gather his elect from the four winds. This idea that he's going to come get us. But what's interesting, it says, this we declare to you, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, that's that word parousia, his arrival. We who are alive when he arrives, he's coming back, will not precede those who fall asleep, meaning those who died. But verse 16 says, for the Lord himself, he will see to this personally, the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with a voice of the archangel, with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead will rise first. He says, we know death's not the end for us because the Lord said, I'm going to take care of you. And then he will personally show up and grab us and grab those who've died and pull us together. Now, there's an important thing we need to talk about at this moment, and it's this. It says, since he rose, he'll bring the dead with him. And we won't have precedence. They'll rise first. If you notice, that's Paul's argument. When you watch that argument, you've got to ask the question of this text. What's Paul doing here? Why is Paul talking about this? Because you know he's addressing some issue in the Thessalonian understanding of the end of the world. You know that's what he's talking to them about. He's answering some question. What's their question? What was their issue? Well, I don't think their question or issue to Paul was, what happens to you when you die? I don't think that's the question at all. Because if you notice, Paul suddenly starts talking about the end of the world. He doesn't answer the question, where are they now? Because I don't think that's the question they were answering. So if you were to ask the question, where are they now? Paul addresses that, and the rest of the New Testament does, in a lot of other places. 2 Corinthians 5:8, Paul says, when we are away from the body, we are at home with the Lord. Philippians 1:21, he says, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. And then he contemplates which he would rather do. And he says, I would rather depart and be with Christ, for that's far better. And so he says, death means to be with Christ. If I'm at home in the body, I'm not with the Lord. But when I leave my body, I'm with him. You see in Luke 16, when Lazarus dies, Jesus tells the story of Lazarus dying. And the story says Lazarus is instantly, his soul is taken to Abraham's side, and he is conscious, aware, and enjoying the presence of Abraham and those who've gone before him. You see in Luke 23, when the thief is hanging next to Jesus on the cross, Jesus says, today you'll be with me in paradise. Meaning, you're not going to go into some catatonic state until the last day when I raise the dead. You're going to be with me somehow in paradise today. In Hebrews 12, it says this, you've come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to the innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect. Hebrews 12 says, up in heaven, not some other place, paradise, Abraham's bosom. It says, up in heaven with angels and with God are the spirits of righteous men made perfect. So when you die, your spirit goes to be with God. That's what it says here. Revelation 6, chapter 9, it's interesting, talks about the souls of the martyrs. And it says that I saw under the altar, they're in heaven, they're by God's altar, under the altar, souls of those who had been slain for the word of God. But then what's interesting in Revelation 6 is the souls of the martyrs are up in heaven with God, but then they start asking God questions. They say, how long before you will judge, avenge our blood? And they start asking him questions. As they're talking to him, you realize their souls are in heaven with God and discontent. And so they're upset about it. They're up in heaven with God, and they're like, okay, this is great, love it all, but we got some problem. And they're discontent in heaven. And you go, why are they discontent in heaven? Isn't heaven supposed to be fully contentment? I mean, isn't that kind of the definition of heaven, is happy place, right? Or something like that? What are they upset about? What they're upset about is the story's not over. The story's not over. And see, the reality is this. Paul does this, and we won't move through all of this. 2 Corinthians 5, Paul says something interesting. He talks about his earthly body, and he says, I'm in a tent. And he says, but if this tent, our earthly home, is destroyed, we have a building from God. He says, in this tent we groan, longing to put on our heavenly dwelling, if indeed we may not be found naked. For while we're in this tent we groan, being burdened, not that we would be unclothed, but we'd be further clothed, and mortality swallowed up in life. See, Paul says something very interesting. This is all going someplace, and it's going to answer the question of what's the matter with the Thessalonians, and it's this. Paul says, I'm in an earthly body, and I groan. This earthly body is getting beat up. It gets tired. It's funny. I was at the gym yesterday, and I was watching these girls do Olympic lifting, and they were kind of throwing this weight up and doing all these different things with them, and then they would throw the weight down and jump over it and clap and do push-ups. And the whole time I was watching them do that, I remember thinking about the scar on my lower back where I had back surgery. And I was like, that looks like it would really hurt. And then I saw her form was kind of bad in Olympic lifting. And I was like, maybe I should help her. And then I remembered the staples in my leg right on my ankle. And I'm like, I can't. And then I started thinking about how much my shoulder hurts because I had to get a tetanus shot or whatever. And I realized, I'm like, I can't help them because my back and my ankle and my shoulder hurt. And I was just like, I remember sitting there and I'm like, oh my gosh, listen to you. You're old. I mean, you are fast becoming that guy that's like, easy kids, the trick knee. You know, like your body's falling apart, dude. And Paul says, I'm in this tent and I'm getting beat up. But then he does something interesting. Go back and read it later. 2 Corinthians 5, he says this. So what do I want? And you know what he says he wants? He says, I want the new tent. I want the new building. I want a new body. And then notice what he says. He says, I don't want to be naked. What does he mean by naked? He says, I don't just want to be rid of this body and be a disembodied soul. He says, that's not what I want. That's not the end goal. That's why the saints in heaven are like, okay, are we going to move on? Are we doing the next thing? Because it's not over. And Paul says, I don't want to be there either. He says, it's not that I want to be unclothed. He says, I want to be further clothed, and mortality is swallowed up in life. And you see in Romans 5, it says the creation groans. Why? It groans for its redemption, the resurrection of our bodies. See, the most interesting thing about the New Testament is this. The goal for us is not to just get out of here. That's not the goal. The Christian hope is not for us to leave. When Jesus left this earth, he did not look at his disciples and go, guys, I'm ascending to heaven. And one day, I'm going to get you off this rock, dude, because this place is nuts. All right? He doesn't say that. What does he say? One day, I'm coming back. And he says, so meanwhile, while you're praying, I want you to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And the great goal and hope of Paul in the New Testament is not being disembodied, floating around things. It's a new body on a new earth, on a recreation of all of this. It's the day Jesus comes back to fix this. See, because you read Genesis 1 and 2, and God is playing in the dirt, making things. He liked the physical world, and the physical world broke. And so Jesus came physically and physically died. And then he rose, and he didn't just say, I'm going to rose and just kind of heal your immaterial parts, and we'll all float around like Casper later. He says, no, I'm going to change you and put my spirit in you. But the end goal is when I remove the curse as far as it is found. It's when I come back and fix everything. Fix the ground and the trees and your broken body and this whole world. And I take the tears away. And I take the pain away. And we have a feast and we enjoy the moment I come back. So the most interesting thing is this. As you read through your Bible, Christians are called all through it. You see in 2 Timothy 4:8, Paul says, what is laid up for me is the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but all. And he doesn't just say all Christians. He says, but to all of us who love his appearing. That's what you're called. You ever thought of yourself that way? You ever put that? Someone says, describe yourself. Have you ever said, well, there's a couple things I would say. And one is, I love his appearing. Hebrews 9:8. Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for him. Does that describe you? Titus 2:11, we renounce worldly passions, awaiting our blessed hope. And the whole book ends with Jesus saying this. The last words Jesus says, Revelations 22, he says to us, surely I am coming soon. And the last words of your Bible are, amen. Come, Lord Jesus. The Christian is someone who doesn't just long to get off this rock. The Christian is someone who longs for redemption to be fully completed, that he comes back and fixes all of this. And so back to the Thessalonians, what's their problem? Their problem isn't where are our dead friends. Their problem is they were longing for this day. The day that our text describes with all this glorious language, where suddenly God descends from heaven. There's a shout, the voice of an archangel, trumpets are blowing. He bursts through the clouds. He comes out. And we are raptured up, caught up. That's where that word rapture comes from. We're caught up with him. We meet him in the air. That word meeting, apentesis, is a set word that means when people go out of the city to meet a dignitary and welcome him into the city. He says, there will come a day where we will go meet our king and usher him back to this earth. Now, some people think there's a 7-year period between that time he pulls us up and we go back. All right, that's called a pre-tribulation rapture. Some people believe it's after the post-tribulation rapture. We're not going to talk about all that because I don't really care. He says a day will come where we will rise to meet him and he will come and fix this. And that was the Thessalonians' hope. Is it yours? That's my question. Do you long for that day? Every time you hurt and every time you see pain in the world, do you say, Maranatha, come, Lord Jesus. Come fix this. Come be with us. Do you pray that? That's how the New Testament prays. And that's what the Thessalonians were like. That's what they were hoping for. You know what it made me think of? It made me think of Lord of the Rings. The big final battle. You know? Everyone wanted to be there. And do you remember when they told one of the little hobbits, was it Merry? The guy who was still in Rohan, they told him, you can't go, it's too small. But the idea of all his friends riding out with the king to beat back the darkness and reclaim the kingdom, the idea of not being in that moment was insane. They're like, no, stay back. And he wasn't like, oh, okay, I'll be safe. He was like, no, I'll hide in a bag. I'll do whatever I got to do to be a part of that day. And I'll come riding in from the west and my people will ride up from the south and we'll all be there. Why? Because this is the moment where the king returns to beat back the darkness and bring peace back. And the Thessalonians had all their hope fixed on the Parousia. And so they were like, we're going to be there together. And then their friends died. And their question to Paul was, are they going to be there? That's the big party, the day the sky rips open and he comes back. Are they going to be there? And that's the question Paul's answering. If you read it again, Paul says, yeah, you won't beat them there. They're not only going to be there, they're going to be there first. They're going to be part of that party. The dead will rise. 1 Corinthians 15 gives you a lot more details on how that'll look. We won't get into it. But he says, but you'll join them. We who are alive will be caught up together in the clouds to meet the Lord, and we'll always be there with him. Therefore, comfort each other with these words. What the Christians thought about that drove them was the day when all of us will be together and we'll be with him. We'll be with him. And they just wanted to make sure, Paul, will everybody be there? And his answer is, yeah. Everyone who died in Christ and everyone who lives in Christ will be with their Christ when he comes to establish his kingdom forever. That's where history's going to move on. So what do we walk away with? Let me say this. 3 things. Number 1 is this. I listened to This American Life recently. And the guy who runs it, it's this radio show, is named Ira Glass. And Ira talked about his uncle going to war and him realizing his uncle may die. And then him realizing that he was an out of shape, chubby kid. And so if he ever went to war, he was a goner. And he said as he was a kid, he was scared of death. He said, galaxies would spin, humans would travel to other worlds, and I'd miss all of it. Nobody would remember me or anybody I've ever known forever. So I would lie awake at night, scared to fall asleep, because sleep seemed no different than death. You're gone. Not moving, not talking, not thinking, not aware. What could be more frightening? What could be bigger? And my answer to Ira is our guy, our Christ. Death is called the final enemy, and he beats him. And this text shows you your God rips through the clouds and takes over the planet. And so don't be scared. Your God's really big. No problem. You see your problems now, they're so big. Resize them as you look at a king who can rend the heavens and come down. Your God is big. And not only is he big, eternity is relationship. What he is pulling us towards, and what Paul ends with, is we will be with him. That's what matters. And so you're like, well, are there clouds and streets of what now? And onyx and sapphire? Hey, don't worry about it. Eternity is we with him. It's relationship forever. Because your God is strong and he loves you. And he loves you. And so we hope for that day. And our hope for that day determines how we live now. That hope changes who we are in this moment. Well, Father, this isn't a super applicational talk in that I've told them what to do. But I just pray and ask now that your Holy Spirit would do that and take this reality that history is going someplace and it's all about you and you're bigger than every tragedy, global and very personal, that we would ever endure. And Father, I pray you would take these wonderful truths and realities about who you are, our mighty King who cares, and I pray you would apply them to whatever is going on in the hearts of men and women here tonight. And God, I pray for those who are in this room that just thought life's about fumbling along and being a good person. I pray now they would see this whole thing as the story of King Jesus. And we get to be a part of it. And I pray even tonight there would be people who say, I want to be yours. And you can cry out and pray tonight and not promise him you'll do good stuff, but you ask him to rescue you from an enemy you can't beat, from death and the condemnation that awaits those who have not found their sin paid for by the only guy who could do it, Jesus Christ. And so you can cry out and say, Jesus, rescue me. And he does. And you can ask the person who brought you about him or ask our care team on my left, your right. But God, I pray that as we enter into these days ahead, we could be characterized as the people who love your appearing. And that wouldn't make us people who are far off and in our own head, but our certainty about that day would make us radically different and radically beautiful people in these days. And we ask that in your name.
Well, hello and welcome to the Breakaway Podcast. Those of you who are maybe joining us for the first time, we do this so that things maybe that you didn't cover in your talk, we do this on this part, or if there's some things you want to clarify, we also use this moment. So I don't know if I'm sure you probably have some things.
Handful.
Actually, your desk is, if people can't see this, but you have I think 10 papers right now on your desk spread out.
Right.
So this might be the longest podcast ever.
No, I don't think it would. But I'll say you're right. It is, the challenge is going, how do you reach a depth that challenges and helps the believer who's maybe been one for a while, but also are accessible to the completely uninitiated. So yeah, if you just jumped in and were like, well, the premillennialists, people will be like, the what? So you're right. And so yeah, there's a ton of notes. And this is one of those talks that you're like, one of the challenges of Breakaway is you just talk once. So I did it once. I'm like, okay, a second pass through it would probably help me because I noticed about mid-talk I was really having to speed up to cover even the little piece I wanted to. But again, that's why we do this. But Yeah, the decision I made was, let's just stay in the text rather than go, okay, he's talking about the end of the world. Let's pull in every end of the world text and talk about the whole topic. I decided not to do that as much as address it within the context of why did he even bring it up? And I really wanted to answer that question of why does it even come up in this text? And it's to affect how they live now. And that's where we started and ended. It's to give you perspective as you face death now and to encourage and comfort each other now. And what's interesting is that's not just what happens in this text. That's what Jesus did in Matthew 24. Same thing. They ask him, what are the signs of the end of the age? And he talks through all this. And then he tells multiple parables at the end. And all the parables are, in light of that end, the day I come, let it totally change how you live now. So be like a bridesmaid who's waiting for the groom. Be like a servant who's getting ready for the master to come home. Be someone who's ready. You know, let the end affect how you live now. It's kind of the big story. So I wanted to get there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's a ton we didn't cover. I had a couple interesting questions afterwards I wanted to respond to. One, I had a student asked me, where does Paul get this? He's like, where is Paul getting this information? Like, where does this come from? And he said, how can we trust Paul? He said, you were talking about trusting Jesus. We trust him. He's authoritative. He goes, but this is Paul talking. Where does Paul get this? Well, Paul gets it from Jesus. If you read Matthew 24, Jesus is asked, what are the signs of the ends of the age? And he spends the whole chapter going through it in detail. And if you just read Matthew 24, you'll go, oh, that's where Paul got it. He's basically just applying what Jesus said to the Thessalonians context. There's a lot more information in Matthew 24. I decided I'm not preaching Matthew 24, and I'm not going to get into all that. And really, a lot of what Jesus is doing is helping to clarify what's in the prophets. Because you see what we're talking about here shows up all over the place in the Old Testament. Even when Jesus said it, he was adding information and clarifying the picture to them, but it wasn't like totally off the charts. Like, what? Like, it was right in line with what they'd been hearing from the people of God for generations. And so this idea of the day of the Lord coming, and even of the archangel's voice and the trumpet blaring, all this is, when you read Daniel 7, and the Son of Man comes on the clouds of heaven. You know, you read Daniel 12, and Michael, the archangel, who's only mentioned there, Jude 9 and here, or really archangel. He's not called Michael in this text, but archangel. Archangel comes, cries out, the dead rise. I mean, that's Daniel 12. That's way back in Daniel. And the day of the Lord and the trumpet blast is showing up in Isaiah 27, Joel 2, Zechariah 9. It's all over the place. And so this is a theme that's playing out all through the Bible. There's a day this will end, and it will end when God comes in glory. And have you contemplated that? And has it affected the decisions you're making now? Because it should. So that's one of the big ideas. But it came from Jesus. So we won't get into all those texts. I would say if you really want to dive further into this issue, I'll do this now. Read Matthew 24. Read 1 Corinthians 15. Paul impacts a lot more information to them about the nature of the resurrection body. We just kind of zoomed through that the goal is not to be disembodied, but to be embodied. Read 1 Corinthians 15, and then read the book of Revelation. Go for it. Knock yourself out.
Well, and I think you even mentioned in your talk that we just heard, if you listen to the podcast, the beginning, that you'll kind of get into more maybe detail in a few weeks coming, I guess. You jokingly said, dragons and whatever, but yeah. So I think people, if they're really kind of hoping for a little more, hold on, we're going to get to some more.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot more to say, and Paul's got 11 more verses on it that we'll do. We have Go Missions, and then we'll cover that.
Mm-hmm. Well, cool. So I guess there's some more questions that students had for you, and love to hear kind of your answers to those.
Well, let me say this. This is something I thought of afterwards. I made a comment. This is your main text, your only text where you get the word that we get rapture from. It's the word in Greek is arpazein. In Latin, it sounds like rapture. It's where we get the word rapture. And people, when they hear the word rapture, it brings up the Left Behind series, the books and the movies and whatever. And this is your main text. This is the one where you get where that word comes from. We'll go up in the air, meet him in the air. And I said, people debate on the particularities of what that'll look like. And I said, that doesn't matter. And I didn't mean that doesn't matter. What I meant was that's not a central issue. Like in the past, I grew up in a day where, I remember the charts of the end times. And so I grew up, I mean, Sunday school was charts of the end times and all the movies on the end times. And so for me, I was pretty end timesed up growing up. And I've since read about, even before I was born, before that, there was a culture in Christianity where, it was like if you disagreed on when the rapture occurred, you couldn't even be friends. And it wasn't that intense when I was a kid, but it was still a big conversation piece. And what I meant is it doesn't matter in the sense of we don't divide the family on that. You know what I mean? It's not like, well, if you think we're raptured before the tribulation, then you're not a Christian. Or if you think post, then you don't love the Bible. That's not it. Godly people understand these texts and the timing of them very different ways. So some people think what's happening here will happen, and then there'll be a long period of difficulty on the earth, and then Christ will come again and take over. That's called a pre-tribulation rapture. Some people think the world's going to get real bad, and then this happens, and that's the end. And that's the post-tribulation rapture, And then you've got an amillennial position, post-millennial. You've got several ways to look at it. And the more I've studied it, the more I've realized they've all got great arguments. It's difficult. And so I would just say it does matter because the Word of God talks about it. And so that's where I want to make that corrective. It matters, and it matters to study this. But it doesn't matter as much as other issues as does the end impact how you live and how we treat each other. That's more important. So the particularities of timing are not worth going to war against each other is what I meant by that. Mm-hmm. But I'd say if you want to go deeper into that, I don't know if we'll unpack all of that in the time we have remaining in Breakaway. I just don't know that we have that time. But I will say this, if you want to go deeper, there's a great place to start. There's a series called Counterpoints. And Counterpoints picks different theological issues and has people who represent different camps write on their camp. And then they all interact with each other. They're wonderful books if you're struggling through an issue. And Counterpoints has a great book on the rapture. So if you're like, I want to know, does the rapture come before the tribulation or after? That's a worthwhile pursuit. I've read several books on that and would say this is a great one to start. I think it's called Three Views on the Rapture. And it's got great guys writing on Douglas Moo and Blazing and some of the best guys out there. There's also one on the millennium. I think it's 3 views on the millennium. It might be 4 views on the millennium. That one's not done by the Counterpoint series, but Daryl Bach writes in that, and Gundry, and some good guys. And so if you really want to dig further into this, those 2 books, I think would be wonderfully helpful to you. The 3 views on the rapture, and I think the 4 on the millennium would get you deeper into it. What I would say, questions students ask me, I had one guy come up who's a soldier, asked me, what do you mean Christians don't take up the sword? Do you mean we shouldn't be in the military? And I said, no. I think you've got texts where the Bible's really clear. God has given government the sword to rule men, to punish those who do evil. So I think Christians can be soldiers. I think it's telling that John the Baptist and others, when they met soldiers, John the Baptist had Roman soldiers come up to him and say, what do we do? And he says, quit cheating people. He doesn't say quit being a soldier. And you don't want to argue from silence too much, but I think that's pretty telling. But then again, you have Peter's direct statement of God's given the sword to government. So there's a place for that, I think. The Christian can serve in the military. And that's not a bad thing, although there is challenges to that, and I won't go into all that. But what I meant was, in the name of Christ, we don't kill. We die for our enemies. There are other religious stances where people will say, I am so committed to my faith, I will kill in the name of God. Or I'll die for my faith, but I'll just take as many of my enemies with me. The Christian doesn't do that. We willingly die for our faith, praying for our enemies. That's what we do. So I wasn't making a comment about the military. I was making a comment about how we live out our faith. I didn't get into this very much, but if you read the ESV and the New American Standard and the NIV, you see that at little points in this text, they handle it differently. And I pointed out some because it does impact interpretation. And whenever you do that, the fear is eroding people's confidence in English translations, which I never want to do. But what I would recommend to people, this is one of the few texts where I think if you have those three versions, if you're really studying the Bible and you don't know Greek or Hebrew, that's okay. Get other translations in English. And in a text like this one, there's about 2 or 3 places where you'll see the ESV, the New American Standard, the NIV, they go different directions in how they understand translating. And you go, okay, what is going on here? Why does the ESV say in verse 14, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep? And why does the NAS say, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Jesus? These are slight differences. It actually, the theology doesn't change, but the translation does a little. I think you can see where translation difficulties happen if you're looking at multiple versions. So even if you don't know Greek, you can look at that and go, oh, they must have had trouble trying to explain this. And at that point, if you're really studying a text and want to go deeper, go get a good commentary, a good linguistic commentary, which we have a list on our website, if you're really wanting to study deeply like that. But none of the differences, other than the 1 or 2 I pointed out, make a huge difference. None of them make a difference theologically, but in terms of understanding the passage, if you really want to be a student of the Bible in your life and you don't know the original language, you're not lost. Just get a couple different translations and compare them, and when you see them really diverge, get a good commentary. That'd be the last thing I'd say. So,
cool.
Anyway.
Well, thank you.
Sure,
we
man.
are going to wrap up the podcast, and just want to remind everybody that if you can join us this coming week, we will have the Go Missions Conference at Central Baptist Church, and you can find out all the information on our website. There's great opportunities to come and kind of be there before Breakaway starts. We'll do, starting at 6:30, we'll open doors for anyone who wants to come, can visit with mission agencies from all over, kind of find out what's going on, different ways to plug in and do things all over the world. And then we'll have some breakout sessions at 7 and then again at 8 with focusing on countries, and then Breakaway at 9.
Yeah.
And our friend Afshin Ziafat will be speaking that night. You will not be.
I will not.
So next week, everybody will hear Afshin.
That's true.
It'll be pretty cool.
And if you don't know Afshin converted to Christianity grew up as a Muslim, and now works with Christians overseas in Muslim countries. So he's got a pretty wild story. We didn't bring him just for the kind of the wow flash factor. We brought him because he's a good friend and we trust him. But he really fits with Go Missions because he's a part of what God's doing in different parts of the world, and I think can bring a unique and helpful perspective to us. Mm-hmm. And so just if you don't know, there's a lot more to Afshin than that, but those are some things that I think make him really appropriate to speak on this topic. So we're excited about him coming, and he'd be great any week, but I think really this is going to be a good fit, and we're excited about it.
Very cool.
So yeah, next week, Afshin.
Good deal. Well, we look forward to seeing you soon, and I hope you have a great day.
So you go.